Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our course on the sacraments. Today we'll pick up where we left off yesterday, just thinking about the sacraments with St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas asked the question, are the sacraments necessary for salvation? Do we really need them? And of course, he answers yes. Of course we need the sacraments. But he gives a really nice explanation of why we need the sacraments. But actually, the first thing that he does is when he asks this question about are the sacraments necessary, is that he gives three really good reasons why we might say no, that they're not necessary. And actually, these reasons you still run into them today. The first reason that you might say no, we don't need the sacraments, is that the sacraments make use of the body. And also bodily things. But salvation is something that happens spiritually. So we don't need the sacraments because we just need, God. It's sort of like God's love and salvation comes into our heart, and that's all that we need. So that's the first reason. But the second reason is a little bit stronger. The second reason, St. Thomas cites 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. Which Paul there, he says that God's grace is all we need. God's grace is sufficient. So we don't need anything else like sacraments or, the church or anything. All that we need is God's grace. God's grace is sufficient. So that's one reason why we don't need to make use of the sacraments, or one possible reason. This one, interesting. I think you still run into it a lot when you hear when you hear people say, "Well, I don't need to, for example, go to confession. I can just talk to God in my heart." It's sort of like just me and God. God's grace is all that we need, and so we don't need to go make use of another sacrament. So that's the second reason or objection. And then this last one here, the third one, is that if you ask, are the sacraments necessary for salvation, you may say, well, no, because Christ's passion is what saves us. We're saved by Christ's passion. And St. Thomas here cites Romans 5:10, which makes that very clear, that we're saved by the death of Christ, where he gives his life, and that is what brings us, that and only that brings us our salvation. Okay. So these are three reasons why you might say, we don't need the sacraments. But then St. Thomas lays out three reasons why we do need the sacraments. And so here they are. I got them listed here. The first reason is a little bit more of a philosophical point. The first reason is just based on human nature. So St. Thomas says human nature, human beings, we are led to spiritual realities through physical material realities. And this, like I say, it's a little bit more of a philosophical point, but for example, we can't think of anything at all without an image, and so we need this physical world, this material world, in order to even think about things that are spiritual, things that are not made of matter. And we do that on a daily basis, just part of our nature. And so there's kind of a nice definition of a sacrament here. So we could say a sacrament equals a tangible means of salvation. It's something that we can get our hands on. It's tangible. We can grasp it. We can feel it. We can see it. We can touch it. So a sacrament is going to make use of physical material reality, even though it leads to spiritual reality. So, in that first reason, sacrament equals a tangible means of salvation. But the second reason that he wants to say that we do need the sacraments is that sin just is an undue focus on material things. It's sin. One definition of sin is that we just focus too much on things of this world and kind of lose sight of God. And so God uses the things of this world as a spiritual remedy to direct us to Him. So, for example, baptism uses water, a physical something that's real here on this earth, so that even though we can sometimes forget about God and direct our minds and our hearts just to things of this world, God uses something like water, or he uses bread and wine, that even though it's a material thing of this world, it redirects us and points us to God. So it's kind of an answer to sin. And then the last reason is it's a reason based on God's mercy. And I really love this reason. St. Thomas says that most human activity is directed to material things anyway. And that's just, think of a farmer. A farmer is in the field and he's working with things of this world. Business people, same thing. We as human beings, we're not angels. We don't exist apart from this material world. We're in the material world. And so just our work, our day-to-day activities take place here. And that is where, St. Thomas says, God meets us there in this world. And he shows us how to worship him using material things, which he has created, and in that way to avoid things like superstition, which is sort of an incorrect use of, or using things to, like magic or to get something from God. God shows us that he shows us how to use the things of this world, like bread and wine, water, oil, things that make up the sacraments, to give honor to him. Okay? So these are the three reasons why St. Thomas says that we do need sacraments. And then he is going to go point by point and answer these original reasons why we might say no. So this first reason, we don't need sacraments because they just use the body, but salvation is spiritual. St. Thomas says, no. Bodily things are used spiritually in sacraments. So bodily things of this world are used in such a way that it kind of redirects us to God, in any sacrament whatsoever. And then the second thing is that all we need is God's grace from 2 Corinthians 12. God's grace is sufficient for us. That's all we need. St. Thomas says that's true, but God gives us grace in a way that is suitable to our nature. To who we are as human beings. So yes, of course, that's all we need is God's grace, but he gives it to us in a way where we can receive it, where we can see it as grace, where we can understand it and receive it. And as human beings, we're led to spiritual things, sacraments, through physical, material things. Okay? And then the last reason is, in a way, the most important, so I'm going to circle it. We are saved by Christ's passion, only by Christ's passion. Again, he's appealing to the authority of St. Paul there. And he says, St. Thomas, that sacraments apply Christ's passion to us. So this is the sort of the kind of the clincher here. Sacraments, one way to think about a sacrament is that it takes Christ's passion and it applies it to us right now. So, of course, we are saved by Christ's passion, and the way that we receive or enter into his passion is by receiving sacraments. And the place that St. Thomas points to, which is where we'll pick up tomorrow, is Romans 6:3. Are you unaware, St. Paul writes, are you unaware that those of you who were baptized into Christ's death, so that by rising with him, we rise to newness of life. So baptism lets us share very literally, very directly in the passion. It applies the passion to us. So we'll pick it up there tomorrow by turning to baptism, look a little bit more specifically at baptism. In the meantime, I would recommend that you read Romans chapter 6. St. Thomas is going to use Romans 6. It's one of the most important texts in thinking about baptism. And so if you have a chance, read it. And the next video sessions this week will refer to Romans 6. Thank you very much, and God bless.